There's a design style built for gray skies, sideways rain, and winters where the sun sets before 5 o'clock, and it was not invented in Seattle. It was invented 3,000 miles away, in a climate that is almost a mirror image of ours. Scandinavian design was born in Norway, Sweden, and Denmark, places that deal with the exact same darkness, the exact same damn cold, and the exact same short winter days that we do here in Washington. And in 2026, that design language is quietly becoming the most requested look for tiny homes across this state. Today we are breaking down exactly why that is, which real builders are doing it right now, what it actually costs, and the one detail that determines whether a Scandinavian-style tiny home survives a Washington winter or falls apart by year 5. Before we get into the details, if you have not already, hit that subscribe button and tap the notification bell. This channel breaks down real, tiny home builds with honest pricing, no sponsorships, and no fluff. And if you're even thinking about downsizing in the Pacific Northwest, you're going to want to see the cost breakdown and the code requirements coming up later in this video. Stick with us to the end, because the final section covers a mistake that shows up in almost every Scandinavian-style tiny home built in a wet climate, and it is one most buyers do not find out about until it is too late. Let's start with the obvious question. Why would a design style from Scandinavia work in Washington? The answer comes down to climate. Norway, Sweden, and Denmark sit at high latitudes, which means long, dark winters, frequent overcast days, and a lot of moisture. Sound familiar? Western Washington gets somewhere between 37 and 60 inches of rain a year, depending on where you are, and much of that falls between November and March, exactly when daylight is at its shortest. Scandinavian architecture developed as a direct response to those conditions. Instead of fighting the darkness, Nordic design leans into it, using oversized windows to pull in every bit of available daylight, pale interior palettes to bounce that light around a room, and warm wood tones to keep a small space from feeling cold and clinical. This is not a trend copied from a magazine. It is a functional design system that happens to also look beautiful, and it was built for a climate almost identical to ours. So what actually makes a tiny home Scandinavian versus just modern or minimalist? There are a handful of signature elements that show up again and again. First, the oversized picture window. Nordic-style tiny homes almost always feature one large fixed window in the main living or sleeping area. This is not just an aesthetic choice. It maximizes natural light during short winter days and creates a visual connection to the surrounding landscape, which matters a lot when your square footage is limited. Second, light-toned wood. Birch plywood is the signature material of this style, prized because it is lightweight, affordable, and gives interiors a soft, honey-colored glow rather than the darker tones you see in traditional cabin builds. Some builders finish it raw. Others apply a matte clear coat to protect against humidity while keeping that natural look. Third, a neutral, muted color palette. Think soft whites, warm grays, and blacks used sparingly as accents. You will rarely see bold color in a true Scandinavian build. The idea is to create a calm backdrop so the architecture and the natural materials do the talking. Fourth, exterior cladding that blends into the landscape. Many Nordic-inspired builds use silvered or dark stained timber siding on the outside, sometimes paired with a black standing seam metal roof. This creates a striking contrast with the bright interior and helps the home visually settle into a forested or rural Washington lot rather than standing out against it. Fifth, functional minimalism inside. Open shelving instead of bulky upper cabinets, built-in storage that doubles as seating, and a general absence of clutter. This is not minimalism for the sake of looking sparse. It is minimalism because in a tiny home, every visible surface either has to serve a purpose or it becomes visual noise. This is not just a Pinterest aesthetic. There are builders actively producing homes in this style right now, and several of them are based right here in Washington. Seattle Tiny Homes, based in Buckley, Washington, has built a strong reputation for sustainable, design-forward builds and consistently ranks as one of the top overall tiny house builders in the state. Their design philosophy already leans toward the clean lines and eco-conscious material choices that overlap heavily with Scandinavian principles, and they will custom design a build around that aesthetic if you bring them the reference photos. West Coast Homes is another major Washington-based builder producing tiny homes, park models, and modular units, with a strong presence throughout the Pacific Northwest. Their park model line starts around $135,000, and their tiny home line start closer to $120,000, both of which can be customized with the light wood interiors and large glazing that define the Nordic look. For buyers willing to order from out of state, look at Wheelhouse. Based in Jackson, Wyoming, Wheelhouse builds glass-heavy, high-ceiling modern cabins built around the same light-maximizing philosophy that defines Nordic design, and they ship turnkey units nationally, including into Washington. If you want that oversized window, wall of glass feel without compromise and do not mind working with a builder outside the state, this is one of the most design-focused options on the market right now. There are also smaller custom shops and independent builders across the state, particularly in areas like Olympia and the greater Puget Sound region, taking on one-off Scandinavian-style commissions. Because this style is having a real moment in 2026, more general tiny home builders are adding it as an option, even if it is not their primary focus. So do not be afraid to bring reference images to a builder whose past work looks more traditional. Let's talk real numbers, because this is where a lot of videos on this topic get vague. Pricing depends heavily on whether you are buying a smaller trailer-based build or a larger foundation model. On the lower end, compact Nordic-style homes on wheels in the 24 to 26-foot range with a single loft have sold for right around $95,000 when built with higher-end finishes like heated floors and tankless water heaters. On the more accessible end, ultra-minimalist versions with simpler finishes like plywood interiors and linoleum flooring have come in under $40,000, though those numbers reflect builds constructed overseas and would run higher once you factor in Washington labor and shipping costs. For a full custom build from an established Washington builder like West Coast Homes, expect to start in the $120,000 to $135,000 range for a base model with the Scandinavian design upgrades, meaning the large glazing package, birch interior finish, and matte black exterior hardware, adding to that baseline, depending on square footage and finish level. A rough rule of thumb for 2026. Budget-conscious buyers working with simpler finishes and a smaller footprint can realistically land a Nordic-style tiny home in the $60,000 to $90,000 range. Buyers wanting full custom work from a reputable Washington builder with premium finishes should expect somewhere between $120,000 and $180,000, depending on size and site work. Design and cost mean nothing if you cannot legally place the home. So let's cover the rules as they stand in 2026. Washington adopted Appendix AQ of the International Residential Code as a permanent part of state law, giving builders and buyers a clear, standardized statewide framework rather than a patchwork of county-by-county guesswork. Under this code, a tiny house is defined as a dwelling of 400 square feet or less that still includes a kitchen, a bathroom, and a sleeping or living area. If you're buying a factory-built tiny home on wheels, it needs approval from the Washington State Department of Labor and Industries, commonly called L&I. The builder submits plans and receives an insignia sticker confirming code compliance, which is the equivalent of a stamp of approval you will need to show local jurisdictions when you go to place the home. If you're building on site rather than buying factory built, that project goes through your local building department instead of L&I. Either way, plumbing work requires a licensed plumber, and electrical work requires a licensed electrical contractor with a permit, no exceptions. And if your design includes a sleeping loft, expect additional code requirements around ceiling height and emergency egress. On top of the state framework, Senate Bill 5383 has shaped how counties and cities handle tiny home placement, and individual cities have gone further on their own. Seattle was one of the first major cities in the country to embrace accessory dwelling units, making it significantly easier to place a tiny home on an existing residential lot as a secondary unit. Olympia went even further and created its own specific tiny house code separate from the state minimum. That said, rules still vary by county. So before you fall in love with a floor plan, call your local planning department and confirm whether you are looking at accessory dwelling unit rules, backyard cottage rules, or standalone tiny house on wheels rules. because the paperwork and inspection process differs for each. Now here is the part we promised at the start, because this is the detail that separates a Scandinavian tiny home that lasts decades from one that starts showing rot within a few wet Washington winters. That oversized picture window we talked about earlier, the one that makes these homes feel so bright and connected to nature, is also the single biggest liability if it is not paired with proper roof design. In true Nordic architecture, large glazing is almost always paired with a deep roof overhang, sometimes extending several feet beyond the wall line. That overhang is not a stylistic flourish. It is the mechanism that keeps driving rain off the glass and away from the wall assembly beneath it. Skip the deep overhang to save on material costs, which some budget builders quietly do, and you are left with a beautiful window that funnels water directly down the exterior wall every time it rains, which in Western Washington is a lot of the year. The second half of this same problem is cladding choice. The silvered or dark timber siding that gives these homes their moody, forest blending exterior needs to be paired with proper vapor barriers and rain screen gaps behind it, not just nailed directly to the sheathing. Builders experience the Pacific Northwest's 37 to 60 inches of annual rainfall already built in that ventilation gap as standard practice. Builders new to the region or overseas manufacturers shipping a design built for a drier climate sometimes skip it entirely, because in a place like inland Sweden, it simply is not as necessary. So if you are shopping for a Scandinavian-style tiny home in Washington, ask your builder two direct questions. First, what is the roof overhang depth above any large window or glass door? Second, is there a rain screen gap behind the exterior siding? If a builder cannot answer both of those clearly and confidently, that is your sign to keep looking, no matter how good the listing photos look. Because Scandinavian design leans so heavily on open sight lines and natural light, certain floor plans work far better than others. A single open great room with the sleeping loft positioned above the kitchen or bathroom, rather than above the main living area, keeps ceiling height where you actually spend your waking hours, right under that oversized window. Galley-style kitchens tend to outperform L-shaped layouts in this design language, mainly because a single run of cabinetry along one wall leaves the opposite wall completely open for glazing. If storage becomes tight, Nordic builders typically solve it with a window seat that doubles as a storage bench or a built-in bed platform with drawers underneath, rather than adding upper cabinets that would block light or clutter the clean lines that define the style. Bathrooms in this style are almost always compact and tucked toward the rear or center of the home, away from the primary window wall, since Nordic design treats natural light as a resource to protect for living space rather than utility space. If you're working with a builder on custom floor plans, this is worth stating clearly up front, because it is a different priority than a typical American tiny home layout, which often centers the bathroom for plumbing convenience regardless of light exposure. One thing people get wrong when they try to replicate this style is assuming minimalism means cold or sparse. The Scandinavian concept of hygge, roughly translated as a feeling of warmth and contentment, is just as central to the design as the clean lines are, and it shows up almost entirely through texture and lighting rather than clutter. Layered lighting matters more in these homes than in almost any other tiny home style. Rather than one bright overhead fixture, Nordic interiors typically use 2 or 3 lower wattage sources, a floor lamp, a pendant over a dining area, and often candles or warm LED strip lighting tucked under shelving, which becomes especially important during Washington's shorter winter days when natural light runs out by late afternoon. Textiles do the rest of the work. A wool throw, a sheepskin on a bench seat, linen curtains instead of blinds. These soft elements keep an all-white, all-wood interior from feeling sterile, and none of them compromise the clean visual lines that make the style recognizable in the first place. If you take nothing else from this section, remember that the goal is calm, not empty. Scandinavian design was never just a look. It was a practical response to a climate that shares more with Washington than almost any other design tradition out there, which is exactly why it translates here so naturally. Get the details right, the overhang depth, the rain screen gap, and a builder who actually understands Pacific Northwest weather, and you end up with a tiny home that is not just beautiful, but built to actually last through everything our winters throw at it. If this breakdown helped you, subscribe for more honest, research-backed tiny home content with zero sponsorships and zero fluff. And if you're already planning your own Nordic-style build, drop your budget and your county in the comments. This community has helped a lot of people navigate exactly that conversation. Thanks for watching, and we will see you in the next one.